We're very fortunate today to have the director of The Jungle Book, Jon Favreau, here. So please welcome Mr. Favreau.
Hi. Hello. All right. That was actually a very good indicator of what the last 3 years of my life has been like. Because when you're dealing with technology, and you're pushing it as far as you can, and you try to do things that nobody's done before, that happens a lot. With motion capture, you're pushing a lot of data around. You're working with code that's pushing the hardware to its limits. You're trying new things. And the thing that makes photography look real digitally is simulations. Whether you're ray tracing, where you're simulating the way that light bounces off of things, or simulating the way fur moves or water. And the thing that makes it look good is how complicated those simulations are. And so we're always, no matter how powerful the computers get, we're always pushing the software to take full advantage of it, because to the artist's eyes, there's always room to make something look more and more photoreal. And to each generation, we get used to the new technology, and you have to come up with new technology to fool the audiences. When they showed Lost World done in stop motion, long before King Kong even, people thought those were real dinosaurs. And we look at it now, it looks like something from a children's show, because the audiences get more and more sophisticated. So if you ever look at effects from a few years ago, sometimes they're charming, because they're so like Harryhausen. Even though it doesn't look real, it's still wonderful. And my issue, honestly, with CGI is if you don't do it right, it loses its charm too quick and dates the movie.
Yeah. No, I mean, absolutely. And I mean, what's amazing, I mean, I wonder if you could talk a bit about how you chose the particular kind of photorealistic animation you have here, because obviously it sets it apart from the 1967 The Jungle Book, which is a more traditional animation. But how did you pick this particular kind of way of doing the story?
It was just really getting the best artists and the best people, and surrounding myself with people that were smarter than me. And just, I've always had a very good eye for talent, both in front of and behind the camera. And like a guy, Rob Legato, who I would hang out with him just to pick his brain before we were ever working together, because he had done, he had set up Avatar, he had done Titanic, worked with Scorsese on all of his recent projects like Hugo, which I thought was beautiful also. And just a really brilliant, smart guy with a cinematic eye. And then Bill Pope, who'd done, Scott Pilgrim,
The Matrix as well.
Matrix, right? And was very comfortable. Was working on the new Cosmos series with a lot of green screen. So people who were comfortable and not scared of technology. And I've been a bit of a Luddite. I've always been very gradual. Even on Elf, we did stop motion. We did forced perspective. Even on Zathura, we did motion control miniatures like they did on the original Star Wars. So I've always really loved the technologies that were used when I was growing up. And then with Iron Man, we got into hard surfaces like metal, and I started to become convinced, because I would give notes, because we have a real suit for certain shots, and we'd have a digital suit for certain shots. And at one point, and I'm pretty meticulous, I'm not mean about it, but I am, I really try to inspire the best work out of people. I think we should, it's hard to, you don't want to give up on a shot. You want to just keep pushing it to be the best you can. And I was given some notes on one of the shots, and they politely interrupted me, the people from ILM, and told me that's actually not one of the digital shots. That's the real suit. And at that point, I knew that I was fooled, where I couldn't even tell the difference between the two. And then I was, it made me very proud of them, honestly. And I laughed, and I love it. I tell the story whenever I can, because it shows that there is a tipping point for certain technologies. And then as I saw films like Avatar, Life of Pi, and most recently Planet of the Apes, I began to be convinced about organic surfaces too, and fur. And that's when we started thinking about, can you do something interesting with this property 50 years after the animated version?
Yeah. Well, now might be a good time to show just a clip to take a look at what that looks like.
You feeling lucky?
I'm feeling like
Okay.
Let's spin the wheel again. No whammy. First clip, please.
So just to be clear, the only thing in that shot that we didn't go to the environment, it was on stage. The only real element in there was Neil Setti, who plays Mowgli, and maybe a small piece of set, not much bigger than this. And by the way, Neil's in the audience, so right here.
I mean, we always can ask a question about the process of like directing, voice actors, but also directing an actor who's going to be interacting with people, things that aren't there. I mean, what was the procedure for that here?
Well, that's really the key. I mean, interactivity is the key to getting the effects right. And oftentimes when you're seeing effects that don't look good, it's because in the filmmaking process, not enough attention was paid to generating elements that the visual effects people can tie into. So it really demands that the writer, the director, the cinematographer really consider what post-production is going to be. And the first film that I saw that really felt like it broke to the next level of that was Gravity. When you see what was, behind the scenes, it was very painstaking. It would be Sandra Bullock, and she'd be in a gimbaled rig with lighting panels that would shift around, robotic lighting, held by robotic arms, and it looked like an assembly line of an auto factory. But really, you were just generating an element that was going to fit into a very specifically pre-planned shot with a light source, a background, and all those things considered. The things that normally aren't hammered out until much later. Usually in post-production, you don't really roll up your sleeves and make those tough decisions. And what you shoot on the set dictates what they have to do. In the case of Gravity, it was determined ahead of time. And certain films do it to certain extents. I've never seen it that convincingly done from my money. And we tried to use that level of planning and involved visual effects in pre-production on the set. They were on equal footing to production. And the results that you see just make you forget they are visual effects.
Right, definitely. I can't resist. Can I ask a question about that experience? Can we get a mic over, maybe? To Neil. Oh, you can. If you can project.
I'll be like Donahue. Remember Donahue, Neil? No, you don't.
Yeah, so is this Neil Setti who plays Mowgli in the movie? So what was it like? Did he have you in like a rig of some sort?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It looks really real, but it's really not.
Yeah. So, I mean, you had to be looking at something that wasn't there at times, or that sort of thing?
Well, they put puppets there, and that really helped me. Yeah. He put puppets there.
That was my idea.
Oh, that's right. Genius.
That was my big idea. That it took a while to get them, but I said, we got to get an eye line that's not just an X or a person or somebody reading from a script. And I kept thinking, with puppets, the kid's going to look at kids always look at puppets. They don't look at the person. Mm-hmm. That's the problem. You put an X up there and I'll read with you. You're going to look at me. You don't look at the X. But you have a puppet, then all of a sudden life is breathed into it. We could have spontaneity. Jim Henson's company designed them, and we had puppeteers. They would improvise. I would change lines. They'd joke around with him. And so it's Neil's joking back and forth with either puppet. Sometimes it would be me, sometimes another actor. We always tried to keep that spark going because it's ultimately the humanity that sells the technical stuff, whether it's the humanity of the performer, the humanity of the animator's hand, the humanity of the performance with the stammers and the normal conversational performance, but it's always the human element that you need to overcome the artifice of all these crazy technical aspects of a film.
Yeah. Was it hard to keep a focus on all of that?
Not really. It was actually a lot easier, and he stole everything I was going to say.
Okay. All right. Well, we won't make you stand here, but thanks so much.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you. And you can see why I picked him.
Yes.
He's just fun to watch, talk, answer questions, audition, and everybody just really got a kick out of him. And we needed that type of energy at the center to make all that go away. And I never wanted to force the animals to do more than an animal would. And that means that to get the emotion, you can only do so many push-ins. To get drama, you need an anchor to pivot on. And so without somebody who had that kind of quality, we would have had a very difficult time, no matter how good the technical aspects were.
Yeah, and yes, it's just amazing, lively spark at the center of almost every other scene. But it also helps to that you have such an impressive cast you assembled for voice actors like Bill Murray for one, and Idris Elba is the voice of Shere Khan. I mean, what was just your technique for directing them? I imagine that's kind of a bit different because they're just kind of standing there.
Well, I'm always looking, being that my background is improvisation and independent film, I'm always looking for the opportunity to create spontaneity, for accidents to happen, for unexpected choices to crash together and make something cool happen. You don't have to get a lot of those moments. You just need it. You need enough of them to make a few good scenes and no bad scenes. You need something to create a human, unexpected, spontaneous moment from time to time. And with Iron Man, the planned visual effects were left alone, and then all the spontaneity came from multiple cameras, improvisation with Robert and Gwyneth and Jeff Bridges, and we would encourage that in the scene work, and then you'd cut to the action, and it's almost like two different sets. It's like the old Teenage Mutant Ninja, the old Power Rangers, right, yeah. Where you'd have a scene and then you'd have the effects unit. Right. And so, because you had to plan all that stuff way ahead of time, so you couldn't really mess around with it. You could mess with the dialogue that was laid over it, but you couldn't. You needed the whole pipeline, the whole length of post-production. So for here, we needed to create that spontaneity throughout, because there is no superheroes, there is no explosions. So it became about getting the right voice performance, and that meant Neil coming with me, with Bill Murray, and them doing the dialogue, and us having capture data from multiple cameras on Bill Murray, so that not only are we getting the voice performance, but we're also getting, for any take, we're getting his eye contact rhythms, we're getting what his face is doing, and depending on which character, we either boil that down to data that drove the rig, or just really specific video reference for our animators to use when they keyframed it. But all of this, again, all that stuff you hear about motion capture, you hear about all these new technologies, these are handmade films. These are just a different set of brushes and paints that are much more photoreal, but it's hundreds of hours of artist time on every single shot that we go back and forth and do versions of to make it look like nobody touched it. So the performances drive it, the spontaneity of the actual recordings, and then finally on set, Neil had to do it again. He had to do it 3 times. We did pencils, like you would in an animated film, show reels with a scratch track of all the voices. Then we did a full motion capture shoot like Avatar for where we place the cameras and how we block the whole thing, and refining the set design. Then finally, after that was all done, we took every shot with Mowgli in it, built small cookie cutter sets that was cut out from the digital set, and built whatever he touched or whatever cast a shadow on him, and he had to perform the whole thing again on film in hair and makeup, and that's in costume, and that's when we had the puppeteers to keep it alive. So he became a journeyman screen actor on this 9-month process.
Yeah, it's a full workout. Yeah. I mean, and all of this really shows when you see the film, because I mean, especially the 3D, it just feels so vivid and has actual depth, and real clarity. You can tell the difference.
And we captured 3D native. I felt when I saw Avatar that felt like, okay, I get why I'm going to a movie theater to see it in 3D. Yeah. And you don't always feel that way. Some films are converted poorly, some are converted well. And the best conversions are pretty convincing, actually, but you can't count on that. And it also cuts off your time at the end of the schedule when you need it most. But Avatar was captured native. They used the paste rig that was developed by Jim Cameron, and they actually had, you got a 3D image that you could look at right there on the set. We use that camera system. We use Simulcam that Cameron developed. A lot of the stuff we used was building on the successes and innovations of other people and using it in an interesting, different combination.
Yeah. I also just want to, jump back in your own career, which, dates, into independent film. And I'm just kind of curious because, you have this meticulous detail for these larger films. I mean, what do you bring from that history of, independent filmmaking to what you do now? I mean,
I think it's understanding the importance of casting. Mm-hmm. I think that any film that I've done that's technical really comes down to it doesn't seem like it because the technical part's the most interesting because it's the newest thing, but Iron Man is Robert. I mean, that's what made that movie. And I think this one, same thing, Neil and the voice performers, that's what makes you feel something. Because if you don't feel something, if you don't connect in a human way to film, that's what it's a feeling medium. It's not a this is all it's nice to talk about because that's what my life's been about for the last 3 years. But the fact is that all of this has to conspire to make the audience scared, happy, relieved, or moved on some level. It's an emotional medium.
Yeah. Well, let's look at the last clip we have, which is quite an emotional scene of Mowgli leaving his family in a beautiful rain coming down. So the third clip, please.
So that last shot that you saw was probably the hardest shot in the whole film. Not the flashiest, but to get a human practical hand running through digital fur, it's not something you see. And you don't see it because you haven't been able to do that up until now. You've been able to have a real and a fake thing sharing a frame, but to have that level of interactivity was the thing that scared all the technical people the most. And for me, it's also a very emotional moment. So it can't draw attention to itself at all. You almost have to not even notice it. But I think you feel something over the course of a film where that's happening all the time. You just start to not question it, and then you turn that part of your brain off, and now you're really on board to experience the film through the eyes of these characters.
Yeah, and we'll go to questions in just a second. But I just wanted to ask about the kind of writing of the film, because one thing I really liked about it is how you get the personalities of all the animals are also pretty, well defined, and you get a real sense of animal wiles. I feel like every animal has his own little strategy or technique for dealing with things. So if you could talk a bit about that.
Well, a lot of that's from Justin Marks, the writer, who worked very hard and was involved with this before I was, when it was much closer to the Kipling version. And then as I brought in my love for the Disney tradition as well, who would think working for Disney that the filmmaker you bring on is pushing you more towards Disney? But I was definitely on that end of the equation, and we struck a balance between what existed in the Kipling, and Kipling was very good at defining each set of animals. And then if you read into the writing, there's subtext to all of it and justifications. So like the treatment of the elephant characters, and this is much different than the silly set pieces in the musical version. We really gravitated to the Kipling, where they're viewed as almost like gods on earth, and they created the forest. They bow before them, and being interested in that ended up leading us to other plot points that weren't in either story. But by finding a combination of tone that honored both references and also honored other classic Disney, not just Lion King, which was certainly a nice nice to be able to look at for the way they dealt with tone and similar subject matter, but also the Big Five. So like when they're, that's a Disney trick there. You have, in that scene in Snow White, when the dwarves are crying and they think that Snow White's gone, and that the real turning point, honestly, for the studio, because they never thought you could have a feature-length animated film, let alone one where people tear up. But when they cut outside, all the animals who aren't crying are in the rain, and the rain is pouring down, and it's a cinematic device that Disney was clever enough to use. And to be able to control the entire environment allows you to do things that you just don't have the time or money to do. Certainly in the smaller films I've done, anytime I've written rain, it's like, really? Because we could
thing to go.
We could save a day with the machines, and it's so hard with the camera, and I let them talk me out of it most of the time. I think I've used rain once in my whole career. Same thing with wind, howling wind. You look at what the masters do. You look at Kurosawa. There's wind, there's rain, there's all sorts of things happening, and it brings but it's. Because he was that kind of maestro where he had the whole, he was the captain of a ship, and it was at a time when he was in his top form, and all the things that we sometimes avoid because of the challenges of the economics of the film business. You see when the masters do it, and they don't unflinchingly go for it. It just brings such power, and using these techniques, like there's a shot in here that's shot at magic hour. Now, anytime I've written The Break of Dawn, the AD says in the first meeting, okay, is that day or night? Which do you want? Because you get 12 hours of only one of those. You don't get, unless you're Terrence Malick and you're going to be out there waiting to get
years
one shot
and years
off,
and years.
or with Chivo and on Revenant, or you have to have a certain type of stomach to be able to push it that far to get that level of artistry. I'm not built that way. I'm too pragmatic. But we have a whole sequence in here that's just as dawn is breaking in, and emotionally services the scene, and it's so wonderful working with the visual effects supervisor and with our cinematographer as we establish the lighting on the set and we look at tests of what it's going to look like, and it's just something you don't normally get to do. So it is like you're playing with a whole new train set here.
Questions from the audience. In the back, please. Okay. If everyone could just wait till you get the microphone so everyone can hear.
All right. How you doing? I'm a huge fan of your work.
Thank you.
Really inspiring as a filmmaker, as an actor myself. It's great to watch your material. Okay, let me try to be succinct. Given your relationship with Disney, I'm just curious about any conversations maybe about you taking on some of the Star Wars franchise material, perhaps a solo, I'm hearing about maybe Ewan McGregor coming back to play Obi-Wan. I personally think that you'd just be perfect for one of those movies, one of the spin-offs. So, and if I can, just a second part of that question is, I know that there's another version of the Jungle Book being developed by Andy Serkis, also involved with Star Wars. So have you spoken to him, or?
I talked to Andy Serkis before he was hired to do the other Jungle Book, and he and I go back. We know each other. It's a small town, and he said it, and we both smiled because it was before any of this started. It was years ago. Fortunately, there's enough space between them. There's I think 2 years between the films, so everything changes. That's a huge amount of time. I don't know where he's doing his thing. I don't know. I'm sure he definitely understands the technology because he's been involved in some of the most ambitious technical achievements and work with other great filmmakers. So, you don't know till you see. But I think that I've been involved with a lot of projects where, as an actor, where it's like a foot race where you're both, I was in Deep Impact and then Armageddon's the same, like within a few, that's when I think that's short-sighted because neither wins. But now everybody could win. Everybody could do their thing. As far as the Star Wars stuff goes, I'm a huge fan. I was very nervous about it happening at all because I grew up and it was such an important thing to me, and really opened the door to me to look into Joseph Campbell and learn about mythic storytelling and the Hero of the Thousand Faces, and Star Wars opened the door for me to Kurosawa. Everything, all of my sophistication came through that little portal, which just seemed like entertainment just for me as a young kid, and so the level of thoughtfulness that Lucas infused that series with was inspiring to a young Jon Favreau and then I looked to his sources and learned more. And American Graffiti. I mean, you look at American Graffiti. We had in Swingers, we had a reference to a reference to a movie. My license plate on the car on Trent's car said THX 138, which was the license plate on the car in American Graffiti, which is a reference to the first film Lucas did. So we did a reference, inside a reference, because I thought so highly of that film, of American Graffiti, which really set, I think, I know I've stolen from in ways I don't even remember. So I think that franchise, the Star Wars franchise, is very important. I know JJ very well. I was very relieved to know it was in his hands, and that because if there's anybody who loves Star Wars and understands it even more than me, it's that guy. And I think he successfully brought it to a new generation. I can't wait to see what these other filmmakers are going to do. And I'm hearing only wonderful things from people on the inside who are getting little tastes of things. So between the Star Wars universe, the Marvel universe, I think this infusion of new, excited, enthusiastic filmmakers is going to help bring fresh inspiration to these old stories and these old archetypes and these heroes' journeys again. But what a great time to be in Hollywood for me. I get to visit the set of, I went from the set of, now I could talk about it because it's all out, I went from the set of Star Wars to the set of the Age of Ultron, like in London, from one set to the other. And I still feel like I did when I was buying copies of Starlog magazine. It's great. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.
Another question.
And good luck. Good luck.
All right.
Maybe we will.
Network. Save the networking for afterwards, please.
Looks like there's a
In the very
question
back,
here.
please. What question?
Hi, my name is April, and I'm curious to know what you did, if anything, with the content from the original movie. The Disney films have so much sort of family impact and a lot of adoption, so I wondered if there was anything that you did differently or thought about differently in the modern version.
I think the modern version, what's nice about this property is it was done 100 years ago, and there was with one context with the Kipling. It was done 50 years ago with a whole other context and a completely different tone, but still following the same myth. And that myth goes way back before Kipling even. It goes back to, the kid raised by wolves. That's Romulus and Remus. That's one of those that when Campbell talks about there are certain myths that pop up in every culture, that's one of them. So you're dealing with the deep stuff that's running through that Jungian weird river that I don't understand, but I definitely respect and dip into whenever possible because it's strong stuff from a storyteller's perspective. And so what's the story for our age? How do we change it each, there were no female characters in the 67. That's not now, so make Ka the snake, who's different in both versions. Why not make it a third version here? And also serve the story, serve a different device of presenting exposition and learning about Mowgli's character as opposed to just hypnotizing him to set up the next beat like in the other one. So look for opportunities that might not have been taken before. Bring Raksha, the character Lapita was voicing here. That was a very important character in the Kipling, wasn't that important in the other one. So you really get to pick and choose and figure out, and then of course you bring the new tech into it. And that updates it, just like me watching Star Wars. I was into it. I wasn't thinking about archetypes. I was watching, this is cool, these are great, these spaceships look so real with all the motion control miniature work they were doing, and that's how you trick the kids into paying attention. But really you're telling them the stories, and then as you get older, it's the stories you love. And the tech becomes fun, and that's the magic trick. But really, this is a magician's tradition, and you look at a guy like Ricky Jay. When he does a card trick, he tells you a whole story about the riverboat gamblers and about this and that. So it's the storytelling part of it that's the real magic. And all the rest of it, this is all people who are working really hard practicing cutting to the ace over and over again. But it's the story that I think makes this, that's why we're all here, that's why we go to the movies. We love that thing, that tradition. We like to sit around the campfire, and everybody does it in a different way. And I'm just incredibly fortunate to be at a moment when that story hasn't been told in a while. We could tell it again, but there's always talk about why tell it again. And by the way, when Walt Disney did it, he didn't pick new stories. He went to the folklore, the fairy tales, and he figured, how could I use all of this new stuff to take those old stories and tell it to a new generation? So I feel like I'm part of a tradition, and just in promoting this and talking about it, it's made me more aware of it. And as I have kids now, and we introduce them to these stories, then it almost feels like a parenting. It's part of that. That's why people bring their kids to Disneyland. That's why you show them Snow White. That's why you show them the movies, Star Wars, the movies you loved, is because you're passing that thing on to them. And as they get older, you show them Godfather. And that's, you know what I mean? And that's why we're here. That's why there's a film society, because we share that love. We share that love.
Oh,
Back here.
It's a perfect way to end, but there's another question.
That's all right.
In the front.
We got
Hi.
Oh, I'm sorry, the microphone's up there. Okay, both, okay.
That's great. Hi, huge fan. So, when and where did you grow up in Queens, and how did that whole upbringing influence what you are today?
You had to bring up Queens.
I had to bring up Queens.
I'm finally in the city.
I grew up in Queens. Now I live here. But so, what are the struggles you faced from coming from there to
Coming from Queens?
from New York to Hollywood?
People made fun of me in Chicago when I lived there for my accent. I like it was. Look, we all have our wherever we're from is burnt into who we are, and those images pop up. Disney, certainly, with Marcelin, the small town background of him. Me, I'm from Queens. I'm from, you look at Iron Man 2, we needed a fictitious backdrop, and that was the Stark Expo. What was the Stark Expo? It was the World's Fair that I was born in '66, and I grew up in a building called the Fairview across the street from the World's Fairgrounds. And I never got to see the World's Fair, and I grew up my whole life looking out my window on the 12th story, looking at this empty park that was beautiful, but there were no real indication of what I had always heard was there, except the Unisphere, which is now my logo, and my company's name's Fairview. So we all have our rosebuds, you know what I mean? And if you look at the end of Iron Man 2, we had to set that, and we created the Stark Expo on those fairgrounds. So we used the plates of Flushing Meadow Park, and ILM built a fictitious expo for our period. And so as that set piece is going on, for me the big thrill is that's the fantasy version of what the park was, or the World's Fair. And the last shot where they're at the end of Iron Man 2, when Pepper and Tony are on after the big battle and everything's in flames, I said, oh, you may as well shoot the plate from, I gave them the address of my old apartment building. And so when that foreground is Iron Man, the background's the view from my window growing up in flames. And I didn't even realize it. I see the movie for the first time. When the effects are done, it's like this weird, I just said arbitrarily, oh, why not be there? That'll be fun. And then next thing I know, I'm watching the view from my window in childhood with everything burning. And it was just a very surreal moment where your subconscious is screaming something at you, and you realize it. So I don't know what it represents, but clearly growing up in Queens had something to do with it.
And then you wanted to burn it all down.
I love Queens, by the way. I worked at the RKO Keith's. Anybody remember that in Queens and Flushing? You do? On Northern Boulevard? I was an usher there in high school, in one of the old movie palaces, talking to the old projectionists up there, watching Return of the Jedi, I think, was there when I worked there. And so I've always loved movies, and certainly New York and more specifically Queens is in my bones.
Yeah. We have time for, well, sure. Over here, please.
So I have a question about the trailer for the Jungle Book.
Hopefully you'll see it at the end here.
So in the trailer when I saw it, I kind of got the impression that it was trying to be advertised as a suspenseful movie. So just kind of have a question about that, like why is it kind of have a bunch of these action shots when Jungle Book's kind of like a heartwarming story?
Well, I think what they do when they present material, they do it, especially a company like Disney that's just particularly skillful at telling that story over the course of many weeks or months. There's different different times for different parts, and depending on what you're trying, if you're trying to get attention, it tends to be quicker cuts, images, beauty shots. And as we get closer and closer to the release, you'll see there's more of the emotional content. Once people are invested in, once their curiosity's peaked, you can start to have a little bit more patience with the storytelling, even in the form of trailers or clips that are released. It's the nature of our moment right now. There's so much content out there, which I think is a good thing. But people are making content on their phones. They're posting it themselves. There's amazing stuff on television, including stuff that would have been on films that are now on cable, pay cable, basic cable, streaming. It's coming at you from all ends, and there are audiences for all of it, and audiences are demanding quality, and the market is rising to meet that. And so as you get to releasing a film, and it's a crowded marketplace, and there are only so many weekends that can bear films that need people to show up in the numbers that help make financial sense. There's a lot of competition for eyeballs everywhere and in the streets. And as I go around New York with these beautiful billboards that are moving, that are having little cinematic experiences on them. It reminds me of when I saw Blade Runner, and you see the movie. It looked like something from the far, far future. But in fact, you're seeing content everywhere, and so I think part of it is making a movie that feels like it could have been made many years ago, and part of it is also getting a new generation to see that and drawing their attention, to draw them into that, to even have a chance to make the case and tell your story.
Up front here.
I loved your reference about all of us having our rosebuds. And I grew up in India, so that's a huge part of who I am. And I remember initially, when I was really young, I watched The Jungle Book, the older movie, and I definitely took for granted how much of India was in the movie, and I think Rudyard Kipling did intend for it to be sort of a subtle but huge part of the movie. And I was wondering how much of that is in your movie.
Well, and we wanted to be authentic to the setting, and that was an opportunity to change what the '67 film was, because it's there, it's implied, but it's all a little more stylized, and we wanted to use the real flora, the real fauna, which got us into problems with King Louis, because that's not in the Kipling, and there's no orangutans in India. And so we're like, how do we do this? But yet it's a memorable element of the movie I grew up with. And that's how we, thanks to, I believe it was Chris Glass, our production designer, in doing research, and I think research is very important for me as a storyteller. It inspires a lot of ideas. The team from MPC that did most of the effects in the film were there for months, and documenting and taking reference, and for textures and lighting and the plant life, and plus you have the internet, which is a huge resource. But Chris Glass, in doing research, found a creature called the Gigantopithecus that has been extinct for tens of thousands of years, that lived in that part of the world. There are remains that have been found, so it really did exist, just not anymore. And they were from like 9 to 12, maybe even taller, feet tall. And their closest living relative is the orangutan. And we started thinking, well, a giant version with this technology, and then we thought of Weta and what they did with King Kong and Planet of the Apes, and now all of a sudden the ideas start going. And we wanted to make it not really, we didn't want to just take the G-rated musical made for kids and do it photoreal. That felt odd to us. So we decided to make a PG version that had a bit more thrills, and to demonstrate that, and to have set pieces that can really be a little bit more adventure, action oriented. And so once we thought about Christopher Walken, then we started thinking about how do you introduce him, and we were thinking about Apocalypse Now at like the end of the... So when you see it, there's a lot of Storaro influence in the reveal of this character. And, for the parents, the kids will like it too. They'll just be a little scared. But then you also have a quirky character who's also menacing. And that's how we landed there. So sometimes your research and trying to give yourself parameters for authenticity actually inspire a completely different set of ideas. It's not always a limitation. Sometimes it could open you up to fresh new things, and that's what you yearn for.
And Christopher Walken also introduces this kind of musical element just in his delivery automatically. Yeah, it's great.
He's definitely got a rhythm to the way he performs.
Yeah. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have, but we are now finally going to show the trailer.
Fantastic.
So,
Well, maybe it might be better this way.
Yeah,
'cause now
better
you've
this
heard
way.
of how we did it, and now you could
Yeah.
tell me whether it worked or not.
Okay, so we'll,
All right.
so we'll show that first. So April 15th it opens.
April 15th, and those of you who are around Midtown, this is the first film to be released. There's a lot of great formats to see this in. IMAX is exciting, especially if you could find one with laser projection. It's pretty exciting in IMAX. But there's also another format called Dolby Vision 3D, and one of the 3 theaters that's showing it in the country in 3D in high dynamic range in Dolby Vision is, I believe it's the AMC Empire.
42nd.
Yeah. If you're all cinephiles, it's, and there's a lot of wonderful stuff being done on celluloid, and you can't argue that that's a beautiful, beautiful medium. But to see state-of-the-art digital, where there was no film, everything was done digitally, rendered digitally, projected digitally, in high dynamic range with deep, deep blacks, beautiful contrast and bright whites, and your glasses disappear. We have it at the El Capitan back in Hollywood. There's one in Illinois, and then here's that other theater. It's worth checking out because this is a new technology that's coming that's pushing the limits on the other end of the spectrum. So it's as a filmmaker, it's very exciting. So it's worth mentioning here.
There you go. Jon Favreau, thank you so much.
Thank you.